Welcome to FedScoopTV. I'm Dan Verton. With me today is Jeffrey Lush, the CTO of Dell Services Federal Government. Jeffrey, thanks very much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
So let's talk a little bit about open source and in particular trends that you're seeing in open source technology.
So it's great to finally see open source kind of taking off in the industry. The software has a huge cost on our infrastructure and everything that we do. And with open source, it gives us a little bit of hope that the future will be a little bit brighter for us, and that a lot of that associated maintenance costs and renewals and the high cost of software will maybe come a little bit back into reality.
Well, which is probably critical today.
Yeah, it is.
Given the government's focus on bottom line.
Yeah, so I mean, how do you really balance the difference between risk and cost? And that's really where kind of that open source discussion leads us to is, can I take the risk to go with open source? My cost will be a lot lower, but my risk may be higher. And in some instances, it's balanced. And so, every case is a little bit different, but there's hope that we're going to drive costs down.
Right. So speaking of government, what areas in the government are you seeing the quickest rate of adoption of open source?
Environments within the federal government that are focused on specific mission requirements tend to be adopting it a little faster because they're kind of that non-mainstream type of user, right? They're doing a specific task, and so open source is there. Where we see a little slower adoption is where it impacts the masses. Big systems. Why haven't we gone to an open source email solution, for example, or so a little slower adoption on those.
Which is probably understandable when we see the history of big systems in federal government. They probably take some more time on the planning side before the deployment of anything.
It does, and there's a lot more of an impact to our user community, right, if something goes wrong. So that risk level is pretty high. And so, and quite frankly, a lot of us, myself included, are apprehensive sometimes of the unknown. And so we want to test it, take it slow, right? A toe in the water at a time instead of just taking a dump into the deep end.
So let's talk a little bit about lessons learned. Are there examples in the government where the private sector might be able to learn something from government use or deployment of open source and vice versa? Maybe the government should be aware of something that's in the private sector.
Sure, so you see, the world's largest healthcare organizations are in the federal government, right? You've got the Department of Veterans Affairs, you've got Military Health Services, both of those organizations moving as quick as humanly possible into an open source type of environment where smaller providers that are very talented can provide quick interfaces or front ends to historical data that's sitting on the back. And so I think from that perspective, commercial can really leverage that and say, and we are somewhat, right? We've got the Apple and the Google, and certainly no endorsement of those products, but those type of stores, geez, I can download an application for 99 cents, right? In a lot of instances. Now it brings it to my desktop. And so I think you're going to see that maturity, and in the commercial space, let's take that and move it in so that any developer, doesn't have to be a multi-million-dollar software company, could develop a really nice and innovative interface for software and allow enterprise organizations like Dell to manage the complex data set on the back end.
Right.
So I think it's pretty exciting, actually, the similarities between the federal government and what commercial can leverage.
So I'm going to ask you what I ask everybody, which is take out your crystal ball, go down a couple of years from now, and tell me where you see the evolution of open source going.
So, over the years, open source has really matured. I mean, Red Hat, for example, the development of Red Hat was based on an open source project, right? That they brought in and have done a wonderful job productizing and supporting and making it really mainstream for a lot of federal agencies and corporations around the globe. I think open source is following in that same venue. It's going down that same road. And we see with the introduction of OpenStack over the last couple of years and how that's going to kind of help put a handle around all those little products, right, that are built into an environment. So I see, in 5 years from now, look, the reality is our economy for the way we're doing IT and how 10 years ago when IT was just used for big corporations and banking and databases, it was okay to have a premium. But now everybody on the planet's using IT, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're streaming Netflix videos, we're checking our Facebook status, and we're tweeting crimes that are going on in our streets.
Right.
So there has to be an evolution where technology starts to become more affordable. Open source and OpenStack and open standard-based technology is going to be the way I think our society and the global economy is going to go there. Related to technology, I'm not solving the world's hunger problems or anything like that, but when it comes to technology and alignment behind organizations that are truly supporting open standard type of technologies, I think that's where the future is going to be. These greenfields that we saw in the 60s and 70s with mainframes, and then in the 80s with personal computers and some of the virtualization associated with that, now we're moving back to where it's supposed to be, more of a open standard. And I mean, I represent Dell. Dell is very committed to that standard as well. So I think that's really the way of the future.
Excellent. Well, Jeffrey, thanks so much for coming by today.
Yeah.
You've been watching FedScoopTV. I'm Dan Verton, and we've been speaking with Jeffrey Lush, CTO, Dell Services Federal Government. Thanks for watching.